My name is Stella May. I am 33 years old, a major in the United States Air Force, and I used to believe that blood was thicker than water. I used to believe that family was the one thing you could never turn your back on. But that belief died on the night 6 armed men smashed through the front door of my house in Las Vegas. The sound of splintering wood exploding into the foyer sounded exactly like breaking bones. Derek, my cousin, stood outside in the dark, smirking. He thought he had won. He thought I would be cowering in the master bedroom, dialing 911, sobbing for my mother. But he forgot who I was. He forgot where I had been. While they were kicking at the deadbolt, I didn't call my mom. I sat calmly at the kitchen island, under the warm glow of the pendant lights, methodically cleaning the disassembled components of an M40 sniper rifle. The sharp, chemical smell of gun oil mixed with the metallic scent of fear filling the room. But the fear wasn't mine. They walked into my home as predators. But the second they laid eyes on me and that stripped-down weapon, they realized they had just stepped into a kill box with no exit. If you have ever been sold out by your own family for a quick buck, type "justice" in the comments and subscribe to the channel. This story is the blueprint for taking your life back. The flight from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar to Nellis Air Force Base is a long haul that leaves your internal clock shattered. I'd spent the last 6 months in the sandbox, breathing in dust and enduring temperatures hovering around 120 degrees. All I wanted, the only thing keeping me sane during that 20-hour transit, was the thought of my own bed. My sheets, my pillow. The silence of my own sanctuary. I took a cab from the base to my house in the suburbs. It was a nice neighborhood, the kind of place where people respected property lines and waved at you when you checked the mail. I dragged my duffel bag up the driveway, the wheels humming on the concrete. The desert sun of Nevada was hot, but it was a different kind of heat than the Middle East. It felt like home. I stood on the porch, took a deep breath, and slid my key into the deadbolt. It didn't turn. I frowned, jiggling it. Maybe the desert sand was still stuck in my gear, or maybe I was just jet-lagged. I tried again. Nothing. The key slid in, but the cylinder refused to rotate. I knelt down to inspect the lock and my stomach dropped. It wasn't jammed, it was brand new. The brass was shiny, scratch-free. Someone had changed my locks. My combat instincts flared before my conscious brain could catch up. I dropped my bag and moved to the side of the house, staying low, checking the perimeter. The blinds were drawn. No movement inside. I went around to the back patio. The sliding glass door was locked, but the small kitchen window above the sink was unlatched. I didn't hesitate. I popped the screen out with my knife and shimmied through, knocking over a bottle of dish soap as I landed in the sink. The first thing that hit me wasn't an intruder. It was the smell. It hit me like a physical blow. A thick, humid wall of stench. It smelled like a frat house locker room mixed with rotting garbage. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve. "Hello," I called out. My hand instinctively went to the waistband of my jeans, though I wasn't carrying. Silence. I stepped down from the counter and my boots crunched on something. I looked down. It wasn't just dirt. My kitchen floor, usually spotless enough to eat off of, was covered in a layer of filth. Sticky dark stains that looked like spilled soda. Greasy In-N-Out burger wrappers. And towering on the granite island, my beautiful granite island, was a pyramid of empty Bud Light cans. Dozens of them. Some were crushed, some were half full, leaking stale beer onto the stone. I walked into the living room, my heart pounding a rhythm of pure rage against my ribs. Pizza boxes were stacked 4 feet high in the corner. Mold was growing on the bottom one, fuzzy and green. But then I saw it. The sight that made my vision blur with red. Lying on the floor, crumpled up next to a pile of dirty laundry and a bag of trash, was my American flag. The folded flag from my grandfather's funeral. It was being used as a doormat. And above the fireplace, my official Air Force portrait, the one where I was receiving my commendation medal, had been defaced. Someone had taken a black Sharpie and drawn devil horns on my head and blacked out my teeth. "What are you doing?" The voice was groggy. I spun around. There, sprawled out on my beige sectional sofa, was Derek. He rubbed his eyes, yawning loudly. He looked terrible. Bloated, pale, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of too much whiskey and not enough water. But that wasn't what made me freeze. It was what he was wearing. He was wearing my white silk bathrobe, the one I bought in Italy. Derek? My voice was a low growl. What the hell is going on? Why are the locks changed? He didn't look scared. He didn't look sorry. He reached down, scratched his leg, and grabbed a half-empty bottle of Gatorade from the floor. Oh, you're back, he said, his voice flat. Dunt Linda said you extended your tour. I didn't extend anything. I live here. This is my house. I stepped closer, the smell of his unwashed body mixing with the stale beer. Get up, get out. He laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was the smug, wet laugh of a man who thinks he holds all the cards. Relax, Stella. You go away for half a year. Leave the place empty. I had to step up. Make sure nobody robbed you. I'm the man of the house now. Man of the house? I gestured to the carnage around us. You turned my home into a dumpster. You're wearing my robe. You disrespected my flag. It's just cloth, Stella. Don't be so dramatic. That's your problem. Always so uptight. Military robot. He leaned back, putting his bare feet up on my coffee table, feet that were filthy. Besides, you're rich, right? Major's pay. You can hire a maid to clean this up. Why are you sweating the small stuff? I didn't scream. That's what he wanted. He wanted the emotional woman. Instead, I walked over to the corner, grabbed his duffel bag, which was already overflowing with dirty clothes, and marched to the back door. Hey, he shouted, sitting up. I opened the sliding door and hurled the bag into the backyard. It landed in the dirt with a heavy thud. Get out, I said, pointing to the door. Now. Before I call the MPs, before I call the Vegas PD. Derek stood up slowly. He tightened the belt of my robe, a smirk playing on his lips. He walked toward me, but he didn't head for the door. He walked right up to my face, close enough that I could smell the onion on his breath. Call them, he whispered, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. Go ahead, cousin. Call the cops. You think I won't? I know you will, and when they get here, I'll show them my mail. He pointed to a pile of unopened envelopes on the counter. I've been getting mail here for 6 months, Stella. I've established residency. In the state of Nevada, I'm a legal tenant. My blood ran cold. I never signed a lease with you, I said through gritted teeth. You don't pay rent. Doesn't matter, he sneered, tapping his temple. Squatter rights, baby, or tenant at will. The law protects people like me from aggressive landlords like you. You can't kick me out. You have to evict me. And that takes 30 days minimum, usually 90 if I fight it. He walked past me, grabbed a fresh beer from a cooler he'd dragged into my living room, and cracked it open. The sound, psh, echoed in the silent tension. So, he said, taking a long swig, since I'm staying, maybe you should clean up that pizza. The smell is starting to bother me. I looked at him. I looked at the flag on the floor. And I realized, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that the enemy wasn't in the desert anymore. He was standing in my living room, drinking my beer, protected by the very laws I had sworn to defend. That smirk. Standing there in my living room, watching Derek grin while he threatened me with squatters' rights, I felt a sudden, violent sense of déjà vu. It wasn't the first time I had seen that look. It was the exact same expression he wore 25 years ago, on a freezing afternoon in late October when he almost got us both killed. The memory hit me harder than the smell of the rotting pizza. I was 8 years old. Derek was 10. We were spending the weekend at my grandmother's cabin near the Ozarks. It was supposed to be a quiet trip, but Derek had found an old aluminum rowboat tied up at a neighbor's dock. It wasn't ours. It didn't have oars, just a single splintered paddle lying in the mud. Come on, Stella, he had whispered, his eyes wide with that infectious, dangerous energy. Don't be a baby. We're explorers. We're going to conquer the lake. I hesitated. I always hesitated. But even back then, the programming was already installed. I wanted him to like me. I wanted to be the good cousin, the brave sidekick. So I untied the rope. We were only 50 yards out when the water started seeping in. The hull was rusted through. The freezing lake water rose over my sneakers, numbing my toes instantly. I panicked. I started crying, frantically scooping water out with a rusty coffee can we had found under the seat. My hands were freezing, the jagged rim of the can slicing into my thumb, mixing blood with the murky water. "Row, Derek! Row back!" I screamed, my voice cracking. But Derek didn't row. He sat in the stern, dry and comfortable, watching me hyperventilate. He wasn't scared. He was entertained. "You're doing it wrong," he said, laughing. "Faster, Stella, or we're going to sink." He watched me bleed and freeze, offering nothing but criticism, until a neighbor on a fishing boat finally saw us and hauled us out. When we got back to shore, shivering and wrapped in towels, Aunt Linda didn't yell at Derek for stealing the boat. She didn't scold him for sitting there while his little cousin did all the work. She knelt down, brushed the hair out of my face, and said the words that would become the chains around my ankles for the next 2 decades. "Stella, honey, look at you. You're so tough. You're a survivor." She glanced at Derek, who was fake crying into his mother's coat. "You know Derek is sensitive. He panics easily. You're the strong one. You have to look out for him. You have to be the bigger person." The bigger person. That phrase is a curse. It is the weapon weak people use to enslave strong people. For years, I wore it like a badge of honor. I didn't realize I was being groomed. I didn't realize that by looking out for him, I was just cleaning up his messes so he could make new ones. The pattern solidified in high school. It was our junior year. I was working nights at a greasy spoon diner on the edge of town, smelling like old fryer oil and burnt coffee every single night. I was saving up for a car, but Derek wanted a leather jacket. Not just any jacket. A specific distressed bomber jacket from the mall that cost $200. He begged. He pleaded. He gave me the sad puppy eyes. "I need this, Stella. It's my image. If I look cool, I can finally get on the student council. It's an investment. I'll pay you back when I get my allowance." I handed over my tips. Weeks of scrubbing tables and dealing with rude truckers gone in a second. I bought him the jacket because I believed in him. I believed we were a team. 2 days later, I saw him at the Friday night football game. He was wearing the jacket. He looked good. But he wasn't alone. He was sitting on the bleachers, his arm wrapped around a girl named Brittany. Brittany. The girl who had put gum in my hair in homeroom. The girl who called me Man-Jaw May because of my strong jawline. The girl who made me eat lunch in the library to avoid humiliation. Derek knew what she did to me. He knew every tear I had cried over her bullying. And there he was, laughing at something she said, letting her wear my investment to keep her warm. When I confronted him later, crying in the parking lot, he didn't apologize. He just shrugged, that same indifference from the boat returning. "Chill out, Stella. She's hot. Don't be jealous just because you can't get a date. Besides, the jacket looks better on her." That was the moment the glass should have shattered. That was the moment I should have realized. He doesn't love me. He doesn't even like me. He sees me as a resource. I am an ATM with a pulse. I am a safety net he can vomit into. But I didn't leave. I stayed. Why? Because abuse doesn't happen all at once. It happens in a cycle. After the cruelty came the apology, the fake tears, the "I'm such a screw-up, Stella. I don't deserve you." He would promise that this was the last time. He would promise to change. And because I was raised on the gospel of family first, because Aunt Linda had convinced me that my strength existed solely to subsidize his weakness, I forgave him. I mistook his dependence for love. I mistook my enabling for loyalty. Standing in my ruined kitchen, looking at the man-child in my bathrobe, I realized the terrifying truth. The 8-year-old boy who watched me bail water didn't grow up. He just got bigger. He just found new ways to make me do the work while he enjoyed the ride. He wasn't here because he missed me. He was here because he had burned every other bridge, and he knew that Stella, the strong one, would never let him drown. But he was wrong. The Stella who bought him that jacket died in the desert. The woman standing before him now had read Marcus Aurelius. I knew that the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. And I was done being like him. I was done drowning to keep him dry. If you have ever been the strong one in your family, who always has to clean up the mess for the sensitive one, please hit the like button right now. And tell me in the comments, what is the most ridiculous thing a family member has ever borrowed from you and never returned? Type parasite if you know exactly how I feel. If emotional manipulation is a slow-acting poison, financial abuse is a gunshot wound. It's loud, it's messy, and it leaves a hole that can't be stitched up with apologies. For me, the gun went off on one of the proudest days of my life. I was 22 years old. The sun was blazing over the parade field as I stood at attention, the gold bars of a second lieutenant finally pinned to my shoulders. I had made it. I was an officer in the United States Air Force. I felt invincible, like I had finally outrun the shadow of my childhood. Derek was there, of course. Aunt Linda had insisted I fly him out. She said he needed to see me succeed, that it would inspire him. After the ceremony, while other families were popping champagne or taking photos, Derek pulled me aside near the parking lot. He looked at my new uniform, at the shiny gold bars, but his eyes didn't hold pride. They held calculation. "You look like $1 million, cuz," he said, lighting a cigarette. "Must be nice. Guaranteed government paycheck, health benefits. Meanwhile, I'm drowning back home." The guilt trip arrived right on schedule. I softened, asking him if things were really that bad. He sighed, blowing smoke away from my face, and told me he lost his warehouse job. He claimed his car died, the transmission was shot, and he couldn't get to interviews if he couldn't drive. He said the world kept kicking him in the teeth. He led me to a dealership later that afternoon. I thought we were looking for a used Honda or a Toyota, something reliable, something sensible for a man claiming to be drowning in poverty. Instead, he walked straight toward a Dodge Charger, jet black, Hemi V8 engine. It wasn't a car, it was a growling beast of testosterone and bad decisions. I tried to argue. I told him it was a muscle car, that he needed a commuter vehicle. But he stroked the hood like it was a lover, arguing that it was American muscle and that it projected confidence for his interviews. He begged, saying he found a great deal and just needed a little help with the paperwork. I should have walked away. But I was 22, high on my new title, and desperate to be the savior Aunt Linda always told me I was. We sat in the finance office. The air smelled of stale coffee and desperation. The finance manager, a guy with a greasy comb-over and a cheap suit, ran Derek's credit. He frowned at the computer screen and told us Derek's FICO score was sub 500. There was no way to finance it unless I was willing to co-sign. The room went silent. My stomach churned. A little voice in the back of my head, my survival instinct, was screaming at me to run. I knew the rules. I knew you should never co-sign a loan unless you were willing to pay it off yourself. But then Derek looked at me. He didn't look like a predator then. He looked like that scared little boy in the sinking rowboat. He whispered a promise that he would make every payment, that I was the only family who believed in him. The finance manager spun the pen on the desk, calling it just a formality to help him build credit. The pressure was suffocating. If I said no, I was the rich, selfish cousin. If I said yes, I was a hero. I picked up the pen. I signed my name. Stella May. That signature didn't just buy a car, it signed away my peace of mind. 4 months later, reality came crashing down. I was at my desk on base, reviewing intelligence reports, when my personal cell phone rang. It was Wells Fargo Auto Finance. They were calling regarding the Dodge Charger on my account to initiate repossession protocols. My blood ran cold. The room started to spin. I asked what they were talking about, insisting my cousin was making the payments. The agent informed me that no payments had been made since the down payment. The account was 90 days past due. I hung up, my hands shaking. I logged into my banking app to check my credit score. My heart stopped. My pristine 780 score had cratered. It was in the low 600s and dropping fast. But for a military officer, a bad credit score isn't just a financial inconvenience. It's a career death sentence. I held a top-secret security clearance. It is the golden ticket of my profession. If you have massive unmanaged debt, you are considered a blackmail risk. Derek hadn't just stolen my money. He had put a target on my back. He was endangering my ability to serve my country. I dialed his number. He picked up on the third ring, sounding groggy. It was 2:01 p.m. on a Tuesday. I lost my military bearing, shouting at him that the bank was repossessing the car. There was a pause, then a sigh. Not of guilt, but of annoyance. He told me to relax. When I screamed that my credit was tanking and I could lose my commission, he just made excuses. He claimed the car was a lemon because the transmission made a noise, so he stopped paying. He said it was a scam. Then, he said something so audacious it knocked the wind out of me. He asked why I didn't just set up autopay from my account since I made good officer pay. He said if I knew it was so important for my job, I should have just covered it. He asked why I was making this his problem. I stared at the phone, my mouth open. The audacity. The sheer, breathtaking entitlement. He truly believed that. In his twisted reality, my success was his insurance policy. My hard work was his safety net. He didn't see the contract as a loan he had to pay. He saw it as a gift I was too stingy to give freely. That was the day the sadness turned to rage, but it was a silent rage, because I was trapped. I had to pay the deficiency balance on the repo, over $10,000, just to save my clearance. I paid for a car I never drove. I paid for his ego. And in return, I learned that you cannot help someone who is committed to their own destruction. You can only choose whether or not to go down with them. They say a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. In my family, Derek's lies didn't just travel, they flew supersonic. The attack didn't come with guns this time. It came through my iPhone. It started on a Tuesday night, 3 days after the repo man took the charger. I was sitting in my living room, which I had spent the entire weekend scrubbing with bleach to remove the stench of Derek's occupancy, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. Ding! It was a text from Aunt Linda. My stomach tightened. I hadn't heard from her since the car incident. I picked up the phone, expecting an apology, or maybe a question about how I was handling the financial hit. Instead, I read this. Stella, I am shaking right now. How could you kick your own brother out on the street like a dog? He told me everything. He's sick, Stella. He has anxiety. And you throw him out because of a misunderstanding about a car payment? I am so disappointed in you. Your grandfather would be ashamed. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the glass. The room suddenly felt very small. My brother? He's my cousin. Misunderstanding. He stole $10,000 from me and nuked my career. I typed back furiously. Aunt Linda, he didn't tell you the truth. He stopped paying months ago. He ruined my credit. He was trashing my house. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then the reply came, cold and final. He said you forced him to buy that expensive car to show off. He said you promised to pay for it as a gift for him getting sober, and then you reneged because you're controlling. Money has changed you, Stella. You've become cold. I dropped the phone on the couch like it was burning hot. It was a masterclass in manipulation. In psychology, they call it the smear campaign. It's what narcissists do when they lose control of you. They can't control your actions anymore, so they try to control how others see you. Derek knew he couldn't beat me with facts. The bank statements were black and white, so he went for the jugular, my reputation. He spun a narrative where he was the victim of my military arrogance and financial bullying. He took my generosity, the very thing he had exploited, and twisted it into a weapon against me. In the weeks that followed, the silence from the rest of the family was deafening. My cousins, who usually liked my Facebook photos of deployments, stopped interacting. My uncle, who used to call me his little soldier, sent my birthday card back to me, unopened. Derek had built a wall around me, brick by lie. But the real blow, the one that actually brought me to my knees, came in November. Thanksgiving. In America, Thanksgiving isn't just a holiday. It is the Super Bowl of family dynamics. It is the day you come home, no matter how far you've strayed. For 33 years, I had spent every Thanksgiving at Aunt Linda's house in Ohio. I could practically smell her green bean casserole and the pumpkin pie from 1,000 miles away. I waited for the invite. I checked my email. I checked my mailbox. 1 week before the holiday, I saw photos on Instagram. My cousin Sarah had posted a picture of the pre-Thanksgiving prep. There was Derek sitting at Aunt Linda's kitchen table, laughing, holding a glass of wine. He looked healthy. He looked happy. He was surrounded by my family, in the seat that used to be mine. They hadn't just uninvited me, they had replaced me. Thanksgiving Day arrived with a gray, overcast sky over Nevada. The base was quiet. Most of the airmen had gone home on leave or were at local families' houses for adopt-a-airman dinners. I put on my dress blues, not because I had to, but because I needed armor. I drove to the base dining facility, the DFAC. The cafeteria was brightly lit with harsh fluorescent tubes that hummed overhead. It smelled of industrial cleaner and instant mashed potatoes. There were paper turkeys taped to the walls, a sad administrative attempt at festivity. I grabbed a plastic tray and moved down the line. The server, a young airman first class who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, slapped a slice of dry turkey and a scoop of congealed stuffing onto my plate. "Happy Thanksgiving, ma'am," he mumbled. "Same to you, airman," I replied, my voice steady, though my throat felt like it was closing up. I found a table in the back, away from the few other lonely souls eating their government-issued holiday meal. I sat down and looked at the food. On my phone, the notifications started rolling in. The family group chat, which I was still technically a part of, though nobody spoke to me, was lighting up with photos. There was Aunt Linda, carving the bird. There was Derek, raising a toast. The caption read, "So grateful for family who sticks together through hard times. Love you, Derek." I put the phone face down on the metal table. Clack. I cut a piece of the dry turkey. I chewed it. It tasted like sawdust. It tasted like betrayal. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and stinging. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fly to Ohio and shake them. "I'm the good one." I wanted to yell. "I'm the one who serves the country. I'm the one who pays my bills. Why are you choosing the parasite over the host?" But as I sat there, forcing down that meal in the empty mess hall, something shifted inside me. The sadness began to calcify. It hardened into something colder, sharper. I looked around the room at the other soldiers, men and women who were away from their families to protect the freedom of people like Derek. People who understood duty. People who understood that actions have consequences. I realized then that Aunt Linda and the rest of them weren't just victims of Derek's lies. They were his accomplices. They preferred the comfortable lie to the difficult truth. They preferred a sensitive leech to a strong woman who held up a mirror to their dysfunction. By cutting me off, they thought they were punishing me. They thought they were banishing me into the wilderness. But as I wiped my mouth with the cheap paper napkin, I realized they had done me a favor. I wasn't losing a family. I was losing a tumor. When you have cancer, you don't mourn the tumor when the surgeon cuts it out. It hurts. You bleed. You have scars. But you don't try to put the tumor back in. You thank God it's gone, and you focus on living. I picked up my tray, walked to the trash can, and scraped the rest of the food away. Then I walked out of the DFX into the cool desert air. I was alone. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the dead weight of people who didn't deserve me. The smear campaign had worked. It had successfully destroyed my reputation with people who didn't matter, but it had also destroyed the last chain binding me to them. Derek had won the battle for their sympathy, but he had just started a war he wasn't equipped to fight. Because now, I had nothing left to lose, and a woman with nothing to lose is the most dangerous soldier on the battlefield. If Derek wanted to play by the rules of the jungle, I was going to teach him the rules of engagement. The morning after Thanksgiving, while the rest of the country was nursing hangovers and fighting for discounted televisions on Black Friday, I was at Kinko's printing out a document that would declare war. It was a standard Nevada 30-day notice to quit. In the eyes of the law, because he had received mail at my house, Derek had transformed from a guest into a tenant at will. I couldn't just throw him out the window, much as I wanted to. I had to serve him. I drove home, the paper sitting on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. Derek was in the kitchen, making a sandwich with my ham and my cheese. He didn't even look up when I walked in. He just kept chewing, crumbs falling onto the counter I had just cleaned. I didn't say a word. I took the roll of blue painter's tape from my pocket, walked to the door of the guest bedroom, his bedroom, and taped the notice at eye level. Slap, slap. The sound of the tape against the wood was loud in the silent house. "What's that?" he asked, mouth full. "That is your 30-day notice," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "The clock starts now. By December 27th, you are gone. If you aren't, the sheriff removes you." Derek chuckled. It was a wet, dismissive sound. He walked over to the door, ripped the paper down, and tore it into confetti right in front of my face. "You think a piece of paper scares me, Stella?" He threw the pieces on the floor. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my home. And you? You're just a bully with a paycheck." He grabbed his keys and brushed past me, slamming the front door hard enough to rattle the windows. He was going out to drink. He always went out to drink when he was challenged, but he made a tactical error. He assumed I was playing a game of emotions. He didn't realize I was executing a mission. The moment his Charger, the one I paid for, roared down the street, I pulled my phone out. "Now," I said into the receiver. 5 minutes later, a white van pulled into the driveway. It wasn't the police, it was a locksmith service, and right behind him, a moving truck I had hired from a local company. For the next 4 hours, we worked with surgical precision. I didn't steal his things. That would be illegal. I was an officer. I followed the law even when dealing with criminals. I packed every single dirty t-shirt, every empty Gatorade bottle, every piece of junk he owned into cardboard boxes. The movers loaded them into the truck. I drove them to a public storage facility 3 miles away. I paid for the first month in cash. I put the unit key inside an envelope, along with a map. Back at the house, the locksmith was finishing up. We replaced every deadbolt with high-security, bump-proof locks. I installed a Ring doorbell camera. I reinforced the strike plates with 3-inch screws that anchored into the frame studs. When I was done, the house felt different. It was empty. It was quiet. It smelled of bleach and lemon pledge, not stale beer and entitlement. I taped the envelope containing the storage unit key and the map to the front door. I added a note. "Your belongings are safe. Your residency is terminated. Do not attempt to enter." Then, I waited. Night fell over Las Vegas. The desert wind picked up, howling against the eaves. I sat in the dark living room, watching the street through the blinds. At 9:45 p.m., headlights swept across the living room wall. I saw him walk up to the door. I saw him reach for his key. I heard the metal scrape against the new lock. It didn't turn. Scrape, jiggle, bang. "Stella!" he screamed. "Open the damn door!" He pounded on the wood. He kicked the frame, but the 3-inch screws held. He saw the note. He ripped it down, reading it under the porch light. I could see his face contort, not in sadness, but in pure, unadulterated fury. He looked at the camera, gave it the finger, and stormed back to his car. He didn't call the police. Squatters rarely do when they know they've been outmaneuvered. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from him. No apologies, no begging, just a promise. "You think you're smart? You think you're tough because you wear a uniform? You're nothing but a paper soldier, Stella. You push pencils. You don't know what real violence is." A second text followed immediately. "You made a mistake. I have friends, real friends. Guys who actually know how to handle a gun, not like you Air Force brats. You want a war? You got one. You better watch your back." A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the AC. Paper soldier. That was the insult infantry guys used for intelligence officers. But coming from him, a man who had never served a day in his life. It was laughable. But the threat about his friends wasn't. Derek ran with a bad crowd. Drug dealers, ex-cons, washouts. If he was desperate and humiliated, he was dangerous. I put the phone down. I walked to the hallway closet and dialed the combination on my heavy steel gun safe. Click, 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 clunk. The door swung open. Inside, resting on the velvet shelf, was my Glock 19 Gen 5. It wasn't a paper weapon. It was a tool designed for one purpose, to stop a threat. I took it out. The polymer grip felt cold and familiar in my hand. I grabbed a magazine loaded with Spear Gold .JHP, jacketed hollow points. In the military, we use full metal jacket, FMJ rounds, because the Geneva Convention requires them. They pass through the target. But in civilian self-defense, you don't use FMJ. You use hollow points. When they hit soft tissue, they expand like a flower, dumping all their kinetic energy into the target, destroying organs and stopping the attacker instantly. They don't over-penetrate. They don't go through the bad guy and hit the neighbor's kid across the street. I sat on the edge of my bed and loaded the magazine. The spring was stiff. I pushed each round down with my thumb. Click, click, click. I slid the magazine into the well. I racked the slide back, CHK, chambering around. I placed the weapon on the nightstand, right next to my copy of Marcus Aurelius. He wants to play jungle rules, I whispered to the empty room. I'll teach him military doctrine. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, listening to the wind, my hand resting near the cold steel of the slide. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a forward operating base, and I was the only sentry on duty. When a threat comes, it usually doesn't look like the movies. It's quiet. It's sudden. But Derek watched too much TV. He wanted a spectacle. At 2:00 p.m. on a Saturday, the spectacle arrived. I was in the kitchen, brewing a pot of black coffee, when I heard the aggressive rumble of engines. Not just one car, but a convoy. I walked to the front window and peered through the blinds. 3 black SUVs had pulled up onto my lawn. Not the driveway, the lawn. They parked in a V formation, blocking my front door. It was a move straight out of a bad action movie. Doors opened. Derek stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was wearing sunglasses, a leather jacket, not the one I bought him, thank God, and he was grinning like he had just won the lottery. But it was the men who got out behind him that made me pause. 4 guys. They were dressed in what civilians think Special Forces operators wear. Black cargo pants, tactical vests that looked like they were bought on Amazon for $20, and drop-leg holsters. They were carrying AR-15s slung low across their chests. My heart rate spiked for exactly 1 second, pure survival instinct, before my training kicked in. I didn't reach for the Glock. Instead, I picked up my phone. I zoomed in with the camera. I looked at their boots, brand new, unscuffed. I looked at their vests. No ceramic plates inside, just empty nylon flapping in the wind. I looked at their hands. The guy on the left had his finger resting right on the trigger guard. Poor discipline. These weren't soldiers. They were cosplay commandos. In the military community, we call them Meal Team 6, or Gravy SEALs. They were washouts, fakes, and wannabes who played dress-up to intimidate civilians. "Stella!" Derek shouted, grabbing a megaphone from the trunk. A megaphone? You have to be kidding me. "Come out, we're taking back the house." I didn't hide. I didn't call 911 immediately. I unlocked the front door and stepped out onto the porch. I wasn't wearing armor. I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I held nothing but my phone and a mug of coffee. The sight of me, unarmed and unimpressed, seemed to confuse them. The leader, a beefy guy with a goatee and a Punisher skull patch on his vest, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he boomed, trying to sound authoritative. "We are a private security detail retained by Mr. May to facilitate his legal re-entry into his residence. Step aside." I took a sip of coffee. "Private security? Is that what we're calling it?" "We're not playing games," the guy said, resting his hand on his weapon. It was meant to be a threat. I looked him dead in the eye. Then I looked at my phone screen. I had spent the last week running facial recognition searches on Derek's known associates. I knew exactly who these clowns were. "You're right, we're not playing games," I said, my voice calm but projecting clearly across the lawn. "Let's talk about games, Marcus." The leader blinked. "How do you know my name?" I scrolled down on my phone. "Marcus Hale, Army Private First Class, enlisted 2012. You spent 6 months at Fort Bragg before you went AWOL because you failed the physical fitness test 3 times. You received an other-than-honorable discharge." Marcus froze, his chest deflated. I pointed to the skinny guy on his right. "And you, Kyle Brennan, you were a supply clerk. You got kicked out for popping hot on a urinalysis test. Methamphetamines, wasn't it? You're a felon in possession of a firearm right now, Kyle." Kyle looked nervous. He took his hand off his gun and took a step back. "And you," I pointed to the third guy, the one wearing a ranger tab on his shoulder. "That's stolen valor. You never served a day in your life. You're a bouncer at a strip club downtown." I took another sip of coffee. The silence on the lawn was heavy. The desert wind blew a tumbleweed past Derek's legs. "So," I continued, my voice turning to ice, "here is the situation. You boys are trespassing on the property of a field-grade officer of the United States Air Force. You are brandishing weapons. And I have already sent your license plate numbers and your IDs to the Vegas Metro Police and the base OSI. I checked my watch. The police are about 3 minutes out. Now, Marcus, since you're already on probation for assault, I'm guessing you don't want to be here when the squad cars roll up. But hey, Derek paid you, right? So maybe you should stay and fight for him." Derek looked at Marcus. "Don't listen to her. She's bluffing. Get in there and break the door." Marcus looked at Derek. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at the distant sound of sirens wailing in the air. "Screw this," Marcus muttered. "Wait," Derek screamed. "I paid you $500. "Keep it for bail," Marcus spat. He signaled his guys. "Load up. We're out." The security detail scrambled. It was a comedy of errors. Kyle tripped over his own feet. The Ranger wannabe dropped his magazine on the driveway and didn't even stop to pick it up. They piled into the SUVs, tires screeching, leaving black rubber marks on the asphalt as they sped away. In less than 60 seconds, the army was gone. And there stood Derek. Alone. He stood in the middle of the lawn, holding his megaphone, looking like a child whose balloon had just popped. The bravado evaporated. The swagger vanished. He looked small. I walked down the porch steps, stopping 10 feet from him. "Your friends left, Derek," I said softly. He was trembling. His face was pale, stripped of all blood. You ruined everything." "No," I corrected him. "I just read the report. That's what intelligence officers do. We find the truth. And the truth is, you're not a victim, and you're not a gangster. You're just a sad man with bad credit and worse friends." I heard the sirens getting louder. "The police are actually coming, by the way," I said. "For the trespassing. And for the damage to my lawn." Derek dropped the megaphone. He ran to his charger, fumbling with his keys, cursing under his breath. He peeled out of the driveway just as the first police cruiser turned the corner. I stood there, watching him run. I felt a surge of triumph, a rush of adrenaline. I had won. I had defended my fortress without firing a single shot. I had exposed them for the frauds they were. But as I turned back to my house, I didn't smile. Because I knew something about bullies. When you humiliate them, they don't learn. They escalate. Derek had tried to scare me with clowns, and he had failed. Next time, he wouldn't bring clowns. He would go looking for a monster. If you enjoyed watching a bully get destroyed by cold, hard facts, smash that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to stand up to a fake, tough guy? Type, "Facts win" if you believe intelligence is the best weapon. Humiliation is a powerful fuel. For a man like Derek, it burns hotter than gasoline. After the fiasco with the Mall Ninjas, the Vegas Metro Police had cited him for trespassing and disturbing the peace. He spent 4 hours in a holding cell before Aunt Linda wired the bail money she probably took from her retirement fund. But Derek didn't go back to Ohio. He checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of North Las Vegas, a place where the neon sign buzzed with a dying flicker, and the carpet smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. He sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, a bottle of cheap whiskey on the nightstand, staring at his laptop screen. His face was flushed with alcohol and rage. He replayed the scene on my lawn over and over in his head. The way I had looked at him. The way I had dismantled his army with nothing but words. He wanted to scare me. Now, he wanted to hurt me. He realized that bargain bin tough guys wouldn't cut it against a field-grade officer. He needed a predator. He opened a private browsing window. Then, he launched a Tor browser. He didn't go to Facebook or Craigslist. He dove into the murky waters of the internet, the forums where the forgotten and the dangerous congregated. He scrolled through message boards populated by anarchists, gun runners, and men who had been chewed up and spit out by the military-industrial complex. He found a thread titled Wet Work, Asset Recovery. The user handle was simply Trident Actual. Derek typed a message, "Need a job done. Fast. Target is military. Need someone who doesn't scare easily." The reply came 3 minutes later. It wasn't a text. It was a signal number. Derek dialed. "Speak," a voice answered. It wasn't the voice of a kid playing soldier. It was deep, gravelly, and utterly devoid of emotion. It sounded like grinding stones. "My name is Derek. I have a problem with a tenant. She thinks she's tough. She's Air Force." "Air Force?" The voice chuckled darkly. "Desk jockey." "She thinks she's special," Derek spat, taking a swig of whiskey. "She embarrassed me. I want her out, and I want her to bleed a little before she goes. I want her to know she lost." "I don't do domestic disputes, kid." "I'll pay double," Derek interrupted. "I have $5,000. Cash." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Send the address," the voice said. "And the cash better be there. If I show up and the money isn't right, I take it out of your skin." "Who are you?" Derek asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Name's Torrance," the man said. "And unlike the clowns you hired before, I don't run." The line went dead. Derek didn't know it, but Marcus Torrance wasn't a cosplayer. He was a former Navy SEAL. But he wasn't the kind they make movies about. He had been dishonorably discharged for excessive force and conduct unbecoming during a deployment in Afghanistan. He was a man who had learned to kill for his country and then decided he liked the killing more than the country. While Derek was sealing his pact with the devil in that dirty motel room, 10 miles away, inside my house, the atmosphere shifted. It's hard to explain to a civilian, but anyone who has spent time in a combat zone knows the feeling. We call it atmospherics. It's the subtle change in the environment that screams danger before you actually see it. It was 8:00 p.m. The sun had set behind the spring mountains, leaving the sky a bruised purple. Usually, at this hour, my neighborhood was alive with the sounds of suburbia. Sprinklers hissing, dogs barking at delivery trucks, the distant hum of traffic from the I-15. But tonight, it was dead silent. I stood in my kitchen, looking out into the backyard. The neighbor's German shepherd, usually a noisy sentry, was nowhere to be seen. The crickets weren't chirping. The air felt heavy, static, like the pressure drop before a thunderstorm. My skin prickled. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My conscious mind tried to rationalize it. "You're just stressed, Stella. You're paranoid because of the threats." But my gut, my lizard brain, said, "Check your corners." I walked to the pantry and retrieved a bottle of Hoppy's No. 9 gun solvent. I grabbed a cleaning mat and my toolkit. I didn't go for the Glock this time. I went to the large safe in the garage and pulled out the long black case. I carried it to the kitchen island and set it down. Thud. I opened the latches. Inside lay my M40A5 sniper rifle. It was a bolt-action beast built on a Remington 700 platform with a Macmillan fiberglass stock and a Schmidt & Bender scope. It wasn't a home defense weapon. It was a weapon of war. I disassembled it. The bolt slid out with a metallic shh click. I sat there in the silence, the smell of the solvent filling the room. It's a pungent, chemical smell, sweet and sharp, that every shooter knows. To me, it smells like discipline. I dipped a patch in the oil and ran it through the barrel. Push, pull, push, pull. This was my ritual. Some people do yoga, some people pray. I clean my weapons. As I wiped the carbon from the firing pin, I thought about Derek. I knew he wouldn't stop. A narcissist cannot accept defeat. It destroys their ego. He would escalate. He would try to regain control. I looked at the disassembled parts of the rifle spread out on the granite counter. The barrel, the bolt, the trigger group. They looked like cold, dead metal. But in the right hands, they were an extension of will. I remembered the words of General James "Mad Dog" Mattis. Every officer in the Corps knows them. They are etched into our psyche. Be polite, be professional, but have a plan to kill everyone you meet. I dipped another patch in the oil. I had been polite. I had let him live in my house. I had been professional. I had used the legal system to evict him. And now? I reassembled the bolt, sliding it back into the receiver. The action locked into place with a sound that was final and absolute. Clack chunk. I wasn't hunting. I was waiting. I turned off the kitchen lights, leaving only the amber glow of the under-cabinet LEDs. I sat in the semi-darkness, the rifle resting on the table, the smell of hops number 9 hanging in the air like incense. The silence outside deepened. Let him come. Let him bring his real friends. My fortress was ready. And tonight, the drawbridge was up. At 2100 hours, the world exploded. There was no knock. There was no doorbell. There was only the thunderous, bone-shaking crack of a 12-pound sledgehammer slamming into my front door. The sound was deafening in the quiet house. It wasn't just a noise. It was a physical pressure wave. Wood splintered. The heavy-duty strike plates I had installed held for exactly 1 second before the frame itself gave way, ripping out of the drywall with a screech of tearing metal and shattering timber. The door flew open, crashing against the interior wall. Dust and drywall debris filled the air like a smokescreen. Through the haze, beams of blinding white light cut into my living room. Tactical flashlights, mounted on rifles. Breach! Breach! Go! Go! The voices were muffled by gas masks, but the aggression was unmistakable. Heavy boots thudded against my hardwood floors. This wasn't a robbery. This was a dynamic entry. This was a stack, a trained team moving in formation. I didn't move. I was sitting on a bar stool at the kitchen island, exactly 20 feet from the fatal funnel of the front door. The only light in the room came from the warm amber pendants above me. The first man through the door swept left. The second swept right. The third man, the leader, came straight down the center, his weapon raised, the beam of his light searching for a target. He found me. The beam of light hit my face, blinding me for a fraction of a second. I didn't blink. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't scream. I sat there, my posture perfect, a white rag in my hand. On the granite counter before me, laid out like surgical instruments, were the disassembled components of my M40A5 sniper rifle. The barrel, the stock, the bolt carrier group, the trigger mechanism. The leader stopped. He was a big man, wearing level full body armor and holding a customized MK18 carbine. He was 10 feet away from me. He had the drop on me. By all logic, I was a dead woman. But he stopped. The momentum of the assault crashed into the wall of my absolute stillness. He expected a frantic woman scrambling for a phone. He expected a terrified victim cowering under a table. He did not expect a field-grade officer cleaning a weapon of war as if she were polishing silverware for a dinner party. The silence that followed the breach was heavier than the noise. The dust settled around us. I could hear his breathing through his mask, heavy, adrenaline-fueled breaths. I slowly picked up the bolt of the rifle. I wiped a smudge of carbon from the firing pin with the rag. The smell of Hop's number 9 gun solvent drifted across the room, mixing with the dust. I didn't look at his gun. I looked at his eyes, visible through the clear visor of his gas mask. "You're slow," I said. My voice was conversational, barely above a whisper, but in the silence, it sounded like a gavel striking a judge's bench. You entered the fatal funnel and paused for threat assessment. That hesitation would have gotten your entire team killed in Ramadi. The leader stiffened. He lowered his weapon slightly, just an inch. It was an involuntary reaction to hearing a command voice. "Who are you?" he growled, his voice distorted. I set the bolt down on the cleaning mat with a soft clack. "I'm the woman who knows your service record, Senior Chief Torrance," I said. The title hit him like a physical blow. Senior Chief. I saw his grip tighten on the rifle. "Derek said you were Air Force," Torrance said, stepping closer. "He said you were a paper pusher. And you believed a junkie." I shook my head slowly, a look of disappointment on my face. "That's sloppy intel, Torrance. You used to be a SEAL. You used to be elite. Now look at you. Breaking into a single woman's house for $5,000. That's what your trident is worth now." "Shut up," he barked, raising the rifle again, aiming the red dot at my chest. "Where is he? Where's the money?" "Derek is outside, probably cowering in your getaway car," I said calmly. "And the money? There is no money. Derek doesn't have $5,000. He doesn't even have $5. Torrance froze. I could see the gears turning in his head. "But here is what I do have," I continued, glancing at my wristwatch. "I have a silent alarm. It's not connected to a security company. It's connected directly to the Nellis Air Force Base Security Forces and the Vegas Metro Police. It was triggered the second your sledgehammer hit my door." I looked back at him. "That was 90 seconds ago. Response time for an officer in distress call in this sector is 4 minutes. You hear that?" I tilted my head. Far off in the distance, barely audible over the thumping of his own heart, was the wail of sirens. Whoop, whoop. That's the sound of 20 years in a federal penitentiary, Torrance. Armed home invasion, conspiracy, assault with a deadly weapon. And since I'm active duty, the feds will take the case. No parole. Torrance looked at the door. He looked at me. Then he looked at the disassembled rifle on the table. He was confused. Why wasn't the gun put together? Why wasn't I fighting back? "You're wondering why the gun is in pieces," I said, reading his mind. "You're wondering if I'm crazy." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the granite. "I took it apart because I didn't want to be tempted to kill you, Torrance. Because if I put this bolt back in, I don't miss. And I don't want the paperwork of explaining a dead mercenary in my kitchen to the OSI. It takes weeks to clear a shooting." It was a bluff. A sniper rifle at point-blank range against 3 men with carbines is a suicide mission. But Torrance wasn't thinking about ballistics. He was thinking about the psychology. He was looking at a woman who was so terrifyingly calm that she treated a home invasion like a paperwork inconvenience. He realized he had walked into a trap. Not a physical one, but a mental one. He had lost control of the situation the moment he stepped through the door. The sirens were louder now. Closer. 3 minutes, I said. You can shoot me, but you'll never make it to the highway. Or you can walk out that door, leave the junkie behind, and disappear. Torrance stared at me for one last, long second. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He weighed the cash against the cage. He lowered his rifle. Abort, he shouted to his team. Abort! Move! Move! The men didn't argue. They spun around, their boots scrambling for traction on the debris-covered floor. They poured out of the broken doorway like rats fleeing a sinking ship. I heard car doors slam. I heard tires screeching. And then, silence returned. I sat alone in the kitchen. The front of my house was a gaping maw, open to the night air. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt, a delayed reaction to the adrenaline. My hands, which had been steady as stone while holding the cleaning rag, began to tremble uncontrollably. I hadn't won with a bullet. I had won with a bluff. I had turned my kitchen into a kill box, not with firepower, but with the one weapon Derek never understood: discipline. I looked at the disassembled rifle. I picked up the bolt again and slid it into the receiver. Click, clack. Now, I whispered to the empty room. Let the police handle the trash. The silence that followed Torrance's retreat didn't last long. It was shattered by the chaotic symphony of justice. First came the sirens, a wailing wall of sound that seemed to vibrate the very foundation of my broken house. Then came the lights, red and blue strobes cutting through the desert night, bouncing off the neighbors' windows, illuminating the wreckage of my front door like a crime scene photo shoot. I stepped out onto the porch, my hands raised clearly in the air, my empty holster visible on my hip. "Officer on site," I announced, my voice steady. "I am the homeowner. The suspects have fled in a black SUV, except for one. Derek. He hadn't run. He couldn't. Torrance and his crew had peeled out so fast they left him standing on the sidewalk, holding a bag of cash that felt a lot lighter than $5,000. Torrance had taken the money and left the liability. When the Vegas Metro Police cruisers screeched to a halt, officers poured out with weapons drawn. Derek didn't surrender like a man. He didn't drop to his knees. He started sprinting toward the officers, waving his arms like a lunatic. "They took my money," he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Arrest them. They stole my cash. That was my deposit." He was so consumed by his own greed, so blinded by his narcissism, that he didn't realize he was the bad guy in this scenario. "Get on the ground," a sergeant shouted. "No, listen to me. That bitch in there set me up." Derek pointed at me, spittle flying from his mouth. "She hired them." "No, wait, she chased them. I want to press charges." He was incoherent, a chaotic mix of lies and confession. An officer didn't wait for him to finish his story. He swept Derek's legs. My cousin hit the concrete driveway, face first. Thud. "Hands behind your back. Now!" I watched from the porch as they ratcheted the handcuffs onto his wrists. Click, click, click. That sound. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It wasn't just the sound of metal, it was the sound of a 20-year burden being lifted off my shoulders. Derek was still screaming as they shoved him into the back of a cruiser. He wasn't screaming for a lawyer. He wasn't screaming for his mother. He was screaming, "That was $5,000. That was all I had." Even at rock bottom, he was counting coins. The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights and official statements. But because this involved an active-duty field-grade officer and a breach of a military member's residence, the jurisdiction escalated quickly. By midnight, my living room wasn't just full of cops, it was full of suits. Agents from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, AFOS-CI, arrived, followed closely by a field agent from the ATF. It turned out I hadn't just stopped a home invasion. I'd inadvertently cracked a case they had been working on for 6 months. Marcus Torrance, the ATF agent told me, sipping coffee in my ruined kitchen. "We've been trying to pin a weapons trafficking charge on him for a while. We couldn't get a witness to flip. But tonight, he used a tactical stack to breach a federal officer's home. That's domestic terrorism territory, Major. You just handed us his head on a platter." I nodded slowly. "And my cousin." "Conspiracy," the OSI agent said. "Solicitation of a felony, assault. He led them here. He paid them. He's looking at 10 to 15 years, minimum." I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt numb. The emotional fallout arrived 2 days later. I was at the base legal office signing paperwork for the restraining order when my phone rang. It was Aunt Linda. I hesitated. I almost let it go to voicemail. But I knew this conversation had to happen. It was the final funeral rite for my old life. "Hello, Aunt Linda." "Stella," she sobbed. She sounded broken. "Stella, please, you have to stop this. Derek is in county jail. They say he's facing federal charges. He's terrified. He's just a boy." "He's 35 years old," I said, my voice flat. "And he hired a hitman to break into my house." "He didn't mean it," she cried. "He made a mistake. He was drunk." "Stella, he's family. You can't let him rot in prison. If you drop the charges, if you just tell them it was a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I interrupted. "It was a crime scene. My door is in splinters. Men with assault rifles were in my kitchen." "But he's your blood," she shrieked, her sorrow turning into that familiar manipulative anger. "How can you be so cold? Where is your heart? The Bible says we must forgive." I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. For years, she had used religion to guilt me. She had used family values to chain me to Derek's sinking ship. But I knew my Bible too. Aunt Linda, I said softly, do you remember the book of Hosea? What? Hosea chapter 8, verse 7. I quoted, my voice steady and final. For they have sown the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind. There was silence on the other end of the line. Derek sowed the wind for 20 years. I continued. He lied, he stole, he abused, and you watered the seeds, Aunt Linda. You enabled him. Now, the whirlwind is here. I didn't summon it. I just survived it. Stella, if you do this, you are dead to us, she whispered. I know, I said. Goodbye, Linda. I hung up, and just like that, I was an orphan. But for the first time, I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. 6 months later, the gavel fell. I sat in the back of the federal courthouse in downtown Las Vegas. The room was cold, smelling of floor wax and old wood. Derek stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit. He looked smaller than I remembered. His hair was shaved. The bloat from the alcohol was gone, leaving him gaunt and hollow. He took a plea deal to avoid the terrorism enhancement. He pleaded guilty to felony home invasion and aggravated assault. Mr. May, the judge said, peering over his glasses, your actions were not only criminal, they were cowardly. You sought to harm the very person who had supported you. Derek didn't look at the judge. He turned around, scanning the gallery. He was looking for Aunt Linda. He was looking for his drinking buddies. He was looking for anyone to save him. But the benches were empty. Aunt Linda hadn't come. Maybe the flight was too expensive. Maybe the shame was too great. Or maybe, without me to pay for things, the family couldn't afford the trip. His eyes finally landed on me. I held his gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just watched him. I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison, the judge announced, followed by 5 years of supervised probation, and I am granting the permanent restraining order requested by the victim. The bailiff moved in. Derek slumped. As they led him away, the chains on his ankles rattled on the floor. Clink, clank. He looked at me one last time before disappearing through the side door. There was no anger left in his eyes. Just the terrifying realization that for the first time in his life, there was no one left to blame. The heavy oak doors swung shut. I stood up, smoothed out the skirt of my service dress uniform, and walked out into the bright, blinding Nevada sun. Justice had been served. But more importantly, the war was over. Time is a strange architect. It tears things down, but if you give it enough space, it also rebuilds them. 5 years have passed since the night the sledgehammer came through my door. It is a quiet Sunday morning in Las Vegas. The desert sun is streaming through the new bay windows, casting long, warm rectangles of light across the hardwood floors. The floors are new, rich, dark walnut. There are no scratches from combat boots. There are no stains from spilled beer. I sat at the kitchen island, the same spot where I once dismantled a sniper rifle in the dark. But today, there is no smell of gun oil. The air smells of freshly ground French roast coffee and the faint scent of lavender from the garden I finally planted in the backyard. I took a sip from my mug and looked down at the uniform hanging on the back of the chair. The fabric was crisp, perfectly pressed, but the insignia on the shoulders had changed. The gold oak leaves of a major were gone. In their place sat the silver eagles of a full-bird colonel. Colonel Stella May. It had taken 20 years of service, 3 deployments, and a war on the home front to earn those eagles. They felt heavy, but it was a good weight. It was the weight of responsibility, not the weight of obligation. My phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen. The area code was from Ohio. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I didn't feel that old, familiar spike of cortisol that used to flood my system every time family called. I swiped right. This is Colonel May. Stella? The voice was older, rougher. It had the raspy quality of a man who had spent time in facilities where smoking was the only currency. Hello, Derek, I said. My voice was calm, steady as a heartbeat. I didn't know if you'd pick up, he stammered. I saw your promotion on LinkedIn. Colonel. Wow, that's big time, huh? It is, I agreed. What do you want, Derek? There was a pause. I could hear traffic in the background. He was out. He had served his time, maybe got out early on good behavior. Or maybe the system just got tired of housing him. I'm getting married, Stella, he said. The words hung in the air. I almost laughed. Of course he was. Parasites don't survive without a host. He had found someone else, some other well-meaning soul with a savior complex, to attach himself to. Her name is Brenda, he continued, rushing the words. She's great. She has a house near Cincinnati. She's helping me get back on my feet. I'm happy for you, Derek, I said, and surprisingly, I meant it. I was happy he was someone else's problem. Look, the reason I called... He cleared his throat. I've been doing the steps. You know, AA. Step 9 is making amends. And I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For the house. For the car. For the guys with the guns. I was messed up, Stella. I was in a dark place. It was the apology I'd waited 20 years to hear. The apology the 8-year-old girl in the sinking boat had desperate craved. But hearing it now, it didn't feel like a triumph. It felt like reading an old newspaper. It was news, but it was history. I accept your apology, Derek, I said softly. You do? He sounded relieved, almost giddy. That's great, Stella. Really. So, look, the wedding is in June. Mom is going to be there. We were hoping maybe you could come. It would mean a lot to the family to see us back together. Let bygones be bygones, right? I walked over to the living room window. I looked out at my lawn. It was green, manicured, and peaceful. Derek, I said, I accept your apology because I don't want to carry the anger anymore. Anger is heavy, and I have a lot of work to do. But accepting your apology doesn't mean accepting you back into my life. What? But you said, forgiveness is for me, Derek, I interrupted, my voice gentle but unyielding. It's so I can sleep at night. But boundaries? Boundaries are for you. And my boundary is that you don't get a seat at my table anymore. Not at my wedding, not at my funeral, and certainly not in my house. Stella, don't be like that. We're family. We share DNA, I corrected. That's biology, not a relationship. Take care of yourself, Derek. Treat Brenda better than you treated me. I hung up. I didn't block the number. I didn't need to. He wouldn't call again. He knew deep down that the well had run dry. I picked up my coffee and walked to the bookshelf in the corner of the living room. It was a beautiful custom-built cabinet with glass doors. On the top shelf, resting on a velvet stand, was my Glock 19. It wasn't loaded. The magazine was in a separate safe. It sat there not as a weapon of fear, but as a museum piece. A reminder. It was a symbol of the night I decided that my life was worth fighting for. Next to it lay a worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I opened the glass door and pulled the book out. I sat down in my leather armchair, the morning sun warming my face. I flipped to a dog-eared page. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. I had revoked the pain. I had revoked the guilt. For years, I thought a fortress was something you built with walls and guns. I thought it was about keeping people out. But I was wrong. A true fortress isn't about isolation. It's about selection. It's about having the courage to decide who gets to walk through the gate and who has to stay outside the moat. I looked around my empty, quiet, beautiful home. Some might call it lonely. They might say, oh, poor Stella, she's a colonel, but she has no family. Let them talk. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean air of my sanctuary. I am not lonely. I am safe. I am at peace. And for the first time in 38 years, when I look in the mirror, I don't see a victim, and I don't see a savior. I just see Stella. And she is enough. Many of us were raised with the belief that family comes first, no matter the cost. But as my story shows, true loyalty shouldn't require you to bankrupt your spirit or your bank account. The most important lesson I learned is that setting boundaries isn't an act of war. It's an act of self-respect. You aren't being selfish by refusing to be a doormat. You are simply choosing not to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Your peace is a fortress. You have the right to pull up the drawbridge and protect who lives inside. Now, I want to hear from you. I know I'm not the only one who has had to make the hard choice between family and sanity. Do you have a Derek in your life? Have you ever had to say no to someone you love just to save yourself? Please share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be the exact encouragement someone else needs to hear today. If this story gave you strength, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's build a community where we protect our peace together.